Whether the house you grew up in remembered more than you ever did would have been listening all along. Before we begin, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more mysterious and emotional true life stories that ask us to reconsider what we think we know and what we try to forget. In the summer of 1997, 8-year-old Jacob Kesler vanished from his family's rural farmhouse in Minnesota. Without a trace, there were no signs of forced entry, no muddy footprints, no broken windows. Just silence for nearly 3 decades as disappearance became a cold file, a tragic memory that dulled with time. But then one winter morning, a letter arrived, no stamp, no return address, just a single haunting sentence. He's still there behind the furnace. That's when Emily Kesler returned home the letter with no return address. Emily Kesler hadn't heard her mother's voice in nearly 6 years. The arrangement wasn't hostile, it was grief that built the wall between them, silent and solid. But when that envelope showed up in Emily's mailbox, tucked between bills and catalogs, it felt like something had been shaken awake. The envelope was old, unsealed, the handwriting her mother's tight, slanted, unmistakable. Inside, a single sheet of lined paper, no greeting, no punctuation. Just 7 words: he's still there behind the furnace. And Emily sat down at her kitchen table, heart-pounding, coffee forgotten. Beside her, she thought about tearing it up. She thought about calling her sister, but instead she crossed to her hallway closet and pulled out a box she hadn't opened in 20 years. It was labeled 1997 Jacob. Inside were clippings, flyers, a school portrait, and a photo she couldn't look at for long, the last one ever taken of her little brother, a house that whispers. The farmhouse had always been a little strange, old heating pipes groan at night, the walls cracked in winter. But behind the furnace, a small sealed room once used for maintenance, there had always been something different. Emily remembered the stories Jacob used to tell at talks. When it's cold, it breathes. When we don't look the wall, remembers of the time. They chalked it up to imagination, the kind children have in old homes with creaky staircases and too many shadows. But now, almost 30 years later, those memories felt less like fiction and more like warnings of mother's silence. Emily called her mother. It rang once, then twice, then picked up. Her voice was thinner than. She remembered, but when Emily asked, "Did you get A?" Letter 2, her mother didn't hesitate. Yes. She said, "This morning, did you tell anyone?" "No." "Because I think it's time." Emily's heart raced. She didn't ask what that meant. She only said, "I'm coming home," part to the house that waited the farmhouse in winter. When Emily pulled into the long gravel driveway, snow was still melting in patches across the field. The house looked exactly as it had in her memories: white siding, weathered by wind, a crooked porch swing that hadn't moved in years, and the tall chimney rising like a cold finger into gray sky. But there was one thing she didn't expect. The front door was open, not wide, just enough to suggest an invitation or a warning reunion in silence. Her mother stood in the hallway, thinner than Emily. Remember her white hair tied in a loose braid. They didn't hug, they didn't need to, they simply looked at each other. "I didn't write the letter," her mother said softly, "but I've been waiting for it." Emily nodded. "Me too." They went inside. The house creaked like it remembered them. The floors groaned under familiar weight. The walls didn't speak, but they felt awake. The basement door later that evening, as darkness fell, Emily stood at the top of the basement stairs. The old furnace still sat in the far corner, rusted and wide like a metal toad waiting to croak. Behind it, barely visible, was the wall, the one Jacob used to whisper about, the one he once drew in crayon and labeled the breathing place. She stepped down slowly, flashlight in hand. The air grew colder with each step, not damp, but sharp, like inhaling winter through cloth. And then she heard a pulse, faint, rhythmic, like something was alive inside the wall to scratch. As Emily approached the furnace, her flashlight flickered. Then on the far side of the wall, something moved, not fast, not loud, but definite. A scratch, then another, then silence. She didn't scream, she didn't run. She pressed her hand flat against the wall. It was warm, almost too warm, and in that moment something pushed back, just slightly, a ripple, as though the wall had just breathed a scrap of fabric. Emily turned quickly and found her mother behind her, pale and quiet. Without a word, they moved the furnace away together. It groaned, resistant from years of rust, but finally rolled back. Behind was what looked like sealed drywall, but at the base was a small tear seam inside. That seam was something Emily hadn't seen in 28 years. A piece of Jacob's blue jacket stuck, faded, torn. She dropped to her knees. "He was here," she whispered. "He was always here." Her mother knelt beside her, and I think he still is. Part 3, behind the wall, the decision to break it open that night. Neither of them slept. The house was too still, the air too thick. Even the wind outside seemed to move in slow circles, like it was waiting by morning. Emily had made her decision. She walked down the basement again with a crowbar in hand, her father's old one still hanging in the tools shed. Her mother didn't stop her. She simply stood by the stairs and said, If it starts bleeding, don't stop. Emily didn't ask what that meant. She pressed the crowbar into the crack and pulled the room that shouldn't exist. The drywall split open easier than expected. Behind it wasn't framing, no insulation, no signs of structure, just a hollow space. And inside that space, a room 6 feet wide, 10 feet long, lined in smooth stone, like old cellar walls, the kind that predated the house's current construction. It shouldn't have been there. No permits, no architectural record, even her father's old blueprints showed nothing in that corner. Yet it was real, and worse, it was occupied. The journal on the far end of the room said a child's mattress, torn, molded over, but still shaped like it had once cradled a small body. Beside it, a journal, water, stained the name on the front, barely legible. Emily flipped it open, and her breath caught the first entry read, Day 3, I think it's feeding through the wall. There were more entries, dozens, all short, some panic, some resigned. I sleep. And it hums. I try not to make noise, it doesn't like light. And finally, she'll hear me someday. She always hears me. Emily's hands trembled. Her mother reached over and touched the page. He was writing to you, she whispered. Even in the trapdoor within the room in the far corner beneath the crumpled rug, they found a hatch iron circular bolted shut from inside the hidden room. Emily kneeled beside her. Her flashlight flickered again. The air grew cold to the wall behind her, gave a low, slow creak, like something exhaling one last time. Then from the hatch a knock. Once, twice, 3 slow times, Emily turned to her mother. But her mother's face had gone pale. That's the knock your brother used. When he was scared, she whispered. He used a knock on the wall like that when he wanted you to come play a part for him. Below the breathing wall of descent, Emily stared at the iron hatch door. Nearly a minute before moving her hand, resting on the bolt, rusted, but loose like someone had opened it recently or never fully closed it. She looked at her mother, who simply nodded. I'll stay here, she said, but don't go far. Emily nodded, pulled the bolt, and the hatch gave with a reluctant groan. The smell that rose was foul, stale, like wet dirt, and something else like copper. She grabbed her flashlight, inhaled once, and stepped into the dark, the underground hall beneath the house. It was a narrow stone tunnel. The air was colder here, still like the walls had never been touched by sound. The walls were uneven, naturally carved long ago. This wasn't a basement extension. This was older, much older. As she walked, Emily's light called. Something scratched into the stone. I see you, I see you, I see you, over and over again. And then beneath, but she's almost here, her throat tightened. Jacob. She whispered. The tunnel didn't answer, but it didn't have to, because the next room to the chamber at the tunnel's end was a round chamber, small, carved like a seed pod, and in the middle a chair, a child-sized chair, bolted to the floor, facing a blank wall. Chains hung loosely on either side, and carved above that chair, stay still to stay alive. Emily's knees went weak. She stepped inside. The flashlight flickered again, then died for 3 full seconds. There was nothing. Then the wall across from the chair began to move, not forward, not back, but pulsing, breathing like it had lungs of its own. The voice in the dark, in that pitch black, something whispered, not loud, not clear, a child's voice, familiar. Don't cry, Em, it's watching again. Emily's breath froze. She reached forward, in the dark, hand trembling, and then her fingers brushed something warm. Flesh not damp, not rotted, but alive. It slipped away, quickly, too fast to hold. She fumbled for her backup flashlight, snapped it on, and found herself alone. No chair, no tunnel, just stone, as if the room had never existed, except for one thing left behind, a photograph. The image was aged, its corners curled. It showed Emily and Jacob at age 5 and 8 on the porch laughing. But someone had scratched a word onto the back hastily, over and over again, waiting, and below that one final note, when you see it breathe, your close, part 5. What followed her back returned to the surface. Emily climbed back to the hatch, her heart hammering, her hand scraped. Roar, her mother rushed to her. As soon as she emerged, flashlight beam catching the edges of her face, now pale and tight with fear. Did you see him? I heard him, Emily whispered. I think I touched him, but something else was down there. She showed her mother the photograph. The breath left the old woman's lungs in a shallow gasp. That was taken the summer before, she said, before the night. He vanished, and yet the photograph was new, as if someone had just placed it there. The house changes. Over the next 48 hours, things inside the farmhouse began to shift. Furniture moved slightly during the night. Drawers opened on their own. The old grandfather clock, silent for years, began ticking again, its pendulum swinging despite having no weights or winding. But worst of all, the breathing wall had expanded. It wasn't just behind the furnace anymore. Emily noticed it behind her childhood closet in the attic, even in the corners of the hallway, barely perceptible, but definitely there. Each spot exhaled warmth and a whisper. Close to the notebook, desperate for answers, Emily tore through Jacob's old belongings still stored in boxes. She found one final notebook. It wasn't a journal. It was a map, a child sketch of the house. but with hidden doors and tunnels marked in red. And at the very center beneath, the kitchen floor was a small symbol, a circle with 3. Thus under it the word nest. Emily had never seen it before, neither had her mother. Your brother always said the house had a heart. Her mother whispered maybe this is what he meant beneath the floorboards. They pulled up the linoleum in the kitchen. Below it warped wooden slats, creaked with age, but one board right in the center sounded different, hollow. They pried it up. Beneath it lay a tunnel even narrower than the first line, with jagged stone and smelling of damp moss, and at the bottom only, visible with a flashlight, was a door, not metal, not stone, but flesh-cold, pulsing. Emily dropped the flashlight to decision. Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder. "We stop here," she said firmly. "He's gone, we make peace." But Emily shook her head. "He's not gone, he's waiting." And now. So as something else, part 6 in the nest, opened the heart, Emily stood above the fleshy door under the house, flashlight gripped tightly, breath clouding in the stale cold air. The door wasn't locked, it pulsed steady as a heartbeat, and when she pressed her hand to it, it felt warm. And almost grateful, she whispered, "Jacob." The door parted, no creak, no resistance, just a silent peeling open like skin revealing its wound. And what lay beyond was not earth, not stone, but memory. The corridor of echoes. Emily stepped into a space that didn't feel like it should exist. It wasn't lit by light, but by memory. Faint flickers of past images hovered around her, playing like old film reels in the mist. Jacob riding his tricycle down the hallway, the two of them playing hide and seek under the table, her father hammering a nail wire. Jacob giggled nearby. The corridor remembered, not through photos, not through objects, but through presence. Every step forward stirred another scene. Every breath she took echoed back as a whisper. You came back, you came back, you came back. The wall that spoke of the corridors and the hallway narrowed into a chamber wrapped in twisting roots, living, moving gently, as if swaying to breath in the center of the wall, but not stone, not with skin, and on it etched in child's handwriting was one sentence: I never left. Emily stepped forward, trembling. She placed her hand against the surface, and it spoke not in sound, but feeling. Flashes of Jacob's emotions flooded her: cold, hunger, fear, hope, endless hope that she would find in the choice of voice, not Jacob's, filled the room, not loud, not angry, just ancient, a whisper in the marrow. He stayed because the house asked him to, and now it offers him back, but something must remain. Emily's breath caught. You mean I stay? Instead, the root stilled the breathing. Paused, and then a small door opened beside her, glowing softly. Inside, a boy sat curled in the corner, no older than 8, his eyes wide, glowing faintly. He whispered. It was Jacob. Not aged, not changed exactly as he had been a day. He vanished, part 7. The exchange. The boy who didn't age. Jacob blinked up at her, fragile and blinking like he hadn't seen light in decades. But his face was exactly the same, not a day older than 8. Emily knelt beside him, her hands trembling, afraid. If she touched him, he'd vanish like a ghost. It's really you, she whispered. He nodded. I waited. I did everything the house asked. I stayed. Still, I didn't talk. I didn't sleep too long. I listened. She hugged him, and he didn't resist. He whispered into her neck, you got older to rule the house. Behind them, the room pulsed again. The voice returned, not in words, but in understanding. The message was clear. One stays, one leaves. Balance must be preserved. This house, whatever it was ancient, not evil, not kind, but ritualistic. It kept Jacob alive in some suspended echo of time. And now it wanted something back. Emily looked at her brother, then at the door, and she knew what she had to do to let her to her mother before making her choice. Emily took Jacob's notebook and wrote one final message. She slid it through a crack in the door that led back upstairs. He's safe. Don't look for me. Let the house rest. Her mother would find it, and she would understand they had both lost so much. But now one of them would be returned. The passing of time, the roots of the room reseated, the chamber dimmed, and Emily felt herself begin to fade, not die, but change. Stretch. Her fingers grew lighter, her breath slowed, and Jacob, he began to warm, his cheeks flushed with life, his eyes focused like waking from a dream. She smiled. Tag, you're free, she whispered. He reached for her hand, but she was already gone. Jacob returns. Upstairs, a hatch swung open with a bang. Jacob stood there alive, real, 8 years old. Emily's mother collapsed in tears. The farmhouse groaned once and fell silent for first time in nearly 3 decades. It slept, part 8, the dreaming house. Years later, 20 years passed. Jacob Kesler grew up under the shadow of something he couldn't explain, something no one dared fully believe. He remembered the basement, the warm walls, the pulsing light, and his sister smiling as she let him go. The world called it a miracle. He never corrected them, but in his quiet moments, he called it something else. A debt. The farmhouse stands. In 2045, Jacob returned to place. He had once escaped the house, had been boarded up long ago, left to rot under vines and dust. But it hadn't collapsed. It waited. When he stepped inside, the air shifted, not cold, not warm, but it were like something old had stirred at the center's presence. The walls didn't breathe now, but the silence was still alive. The new room. Jacob walked to the kitchen. He found the old floorboards and pried them open. The tunnel was gone, filled and erased. But beneath one board was a note folded, wrapped in cloth. It was Emily's handwriting. You made it good, then the house is done with me. But not with you. If it ever wakes again, promise you'll help someone else see it. Not everyone who disappears is gone. Some of us are just waiting the legacy. Jacob did more than promise. He created the Kesler Foundation, focused on missing persons, child recovery, and psychological trauma-tied, unexplained disappearances. He shared his story selectively, but every time he did, one thing stayed the same. He always ended with a single line the house remembered, because so did she. Closing image. On the 50th anniversary of Jacob's disappearance, a group of children visited the old farmhouse, now a memorial. One wandered behind the furnace and placed a hand on the wall. It was cool still, but just for a second it breathed. If the story moved you, share it. If you believe no one is ever truly forgotten, subscribe to our channel. And remember, sometimes memory is stronger than time. Sometimes a wall can breathe. And sometimes the people we lose are the ones still holding the door.